could easily pay zero tax. You actually don't have to be a tax resident anywhere. Let's say you just want to be an expat and you want to go live on the beach in Costa Rica and go surf every day and run your company. You don't pay tax in Costa Rica on income you earn from a company outside of Costa Rica.
Back to the Lifestyle Entrepreneur Show. I am, of course, your host, Mark, and this is the show where we believe in working less and living more. And we do that by building businesses that allow you to buy back your time, spend more time with your family, less time working, and give you the financial freedom that you deserve. So if that sounds like your thing, subscribe on YouTube and on Spotify. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to the Lifestyle Entrepreneur Podcast. I have a very special guest joining me today who I know you are going to be thrilled to hear from, because I personally am thrilled to dive into this topic of tax optimization, beyond just your own country. We're talking international tax optimization here. Really cool strategies, things that I've personally been researching for years now. So I have a lot of questions to ask for our guest, Bobby Casey. Bobby Casey, thank you for joining us. He is a lifelong entrepreneur, an international tax strategist, and managing partner of Global Wealth Protection. And he is also the founder of Business Anywhere. Business Anywhere helps specialize in digital nomads, investors, and business owners to legally reduce your tax burden, protect your assets, and structure companies and corporations for maximum flexibility and privacy. I absolutely love that. And through his advisory work and company building experience, Bobby has helped thousands of clients around the world build resilient and location-independent lives and businesses. And that's all that we're about here on the Lifestyle Entrepreneur Show. So Bobby, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Looking forward to it.
So Bobby, I want to talk about two main things. Number one, I want to talk about how you started and grew your Business Anywhere. And then number two, I want to dive into these tax optimization strategies that you know so well and really understand how that works. So to start, when did you found Business Anywhere, and why did you create your company?
So kind of a longer history with that. Just a little tiny bit of background about me. I mean, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My grandpa had a chain of restaurants. My dad had a construction company. So I never grew up with the concept of, get that job and, go to school, get a job, blah, 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 all that stuff. I never had that mindset growing up. My only thought ever was what kind of business am I going to start? What kind of company am I going to run? So, I mean, I was kind of doing my own thing even as a teenager, a lot of normal teen stuff, mowing yards and stuff like that. But I started my first real business when I would say 19. I guess 19. It failed miserably. I started another one when I was 20 that failed pretty badly. And I started another one right after that did pretty well. So that led me to, I had multiple businesses. So I started a service company, an installation company in the US that grew to be pretty decent size. And over that time, I had some other stuff going on. I owned a restaurant, real estate development business, stuff like that, a few other things. And I ended up hiring somebody like me to help me do the things that I do now for clients. And basically, I just got concerned. I had I had a few businesses, a bunch of assets, stuff like that. This was in my 20s. I guess I was probably 26 or 7 or something like that, which feels like about 1,000 years ago right now. But I hired a guy like me. And I thought, this is actually really cool. The way he went through the problem solving, the puzzle solving kind of process with restructuring my business, restructuring my assets, helping with tax optimization, helping with asset protection and stuff like that. So we became friends. And at that time, all of my friends were entrepreneurs. So I said, hey, what if I bring clients to you and we kind of work together on this, and I do some consulting, and what I can't answer, we work together on. And he goes, yeah, sure. I'm always looking for new ways to reach clients. So it kind of started out like that, where I was just doing some consulting. This was like 2001, I think, somewhere around there, 2000, 2001, something like that. And over the course of that, I was doing some consulting with just people I knew. After a few years, I ended up selling. I sold my restaurant like a year later. I sold out of the real estate thing. I sold the service company a few years later. And on the lifestyle topic, which I think this might be interesting for you and your audience. I mean, I know you're focused on lifestyle business and that sort of thing. I mean, let's be honest. I hated my business at that time. I hated my business, hate like my main business, my installation company. I hated the business. I hated the customers. I hated the employees. My God, I hated everything about it. And it was it was funny because I used to have an RV at the time. Actually, I have one now too, but back then I had a different RV. And I did a week long trip at the beach by myself, like just to reflect and kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And during that week long trip in Outer Banks, North Carolina, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I hate it. My whole life is focused around my business. Everything I do is focused around my business. I call it the bullseye effect. That my job, my career, my business was kind of the bullseye in the middle, and everything else was like a ring around that career, that business that I had, and I just hated it. I was disgusted with everything. And so that week long trip in Outer Banks in my RV, I just replanned everything. And one of the things that it led me was I really wanted a business that allowed the lifestyle that I wanted. So instead of making the business that bullseye, I wanted my lifestyle to be the bullseye, and I wanted everything else to be a ring around it. I wanted my business to be a ring around the lifestyle that I chose. So I did things, like what's my perfect day look like? Where do I want to live? What do I want to see? These types of things. And I realized I'm already doing this consulting thing, helping people with asset protection and tax optimization and stuff like that. And actually, it fits everything I want. I get to work with entrepreneurs who I like. I like dealing with entrepreneurs. I like solving puzzles. I like talking to people. I can do it literally from anywhere in the world as long as I got a phone and a laptop. And it just kind of blossomed from there. So that's how my consulting business kind of started. Well, Business Anywhere was a offshoot of that, because through my consulting business, that's the global wealth protection. But through the consulting business, I was referring clients out to different things like, hey, you need to create your virtual mailbox here. You need to register your company here. You need a registered agent here. You need to set up a trust here. And I just decided I don't like referring people out to everything. So I started all of those companies. And so Business Anywhere is one of those companies that I started a few years ago as an offshoot of that. And I just kind of rolled into it like that. I know that was a long answer, but I thought it might be relevant for the whole lifestyle purpose. So I built Business Anywhere not only for my lifestyle, but also my employees and our team members all work remotely. So I built it intentionally to allow all of our employees to have the ability to work from home, because I really think, like, it's a funny thing, but like, we don't track anybody's hours. We don't track anything on that. They have goals to achieve for the week, and all we care about is they hit those goals. And so the way I look at it is, not only did I want the lifestyle business for me, for my own lifestyle, but I wanted to have my employees to have the ability to, hey, take a 2 hour lunch with their kids one day. Or you got to take your kid to the doctor in the middle of the day. I mean, it's so annoying when you work a 9 to 5 and you got to like ask for time off or plan it and schedule it in advance. We just don't do it. We just don't do it. So I built that it works for me and my employees. Like, I just had a team call earlier today, and one of my employees came to me and she said, hey, I got to go take care of my mom for a couple weeks. She's having like open heart surgery and she lives like 3 states away. She goes, I'm going to fly down to see my mom and spend a couple weeks with her. I just want to let you know. Like, she didn't ask me, like, is it okay if I take the time off? She said, hey, I just want to let you know that's where I'm going to be. She said, don't worry, I'm going to take my computer and I'll just do my work sitting at my mom's house. I'm like, that's cool. Yeah, whatever. So I'm so passionate about, number one, entrepreneurship, and I'm passionate about people living a quality of life that's meaningful to them. And I wanted it not just for me, but for my team as well.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. We also, my wife and I, both run our businesses very similar, where everyone's virtual. And we found there's been a lot of benefits to giving your employees who are adults that full autonomy, basically, right? I think it's odd how, we lead as a youth who's developing, you leave high school, you go into college, all of a sudden you can set your own schedule. Don't show up to class, go eat whenever, do all, it doesn't matter,
Right.
right? Like you're in control of your
Yeah.
life. Like, oh, this is what being an adult's like. And then you get that first corporate job, and then it all of a sudden feels like a prison again. And you're like, wait, why do I have to ask to take my kid to the doctor here? Why do I need to ask for vacation all the time? Like,
Back in fifth grade
and
again.
yeah, exactly. You go backwards. And at
Yeah.
least from my own experience, we have been able to not just attract, but keep top talent because of that essentially autonomy that you give your team. So I really admire you for doing that. I want to get a little more detailed in this concept of
Sure.
the bullseye effect that you talked about.
Yeah.
When it was an installation business, right? Or
In-
installation.
installation. So,
Installation. What did you install?
well, yeah, I was trying to, yeah, we can go over it. I was trying to keep the details so we don't get into too much detail. But basically, that business started out, we actually, it sounds silly, but it started out, we assembled bicycles for Walmart. And it actually started out as a business completely. It was one of these things that I started with the idea, hey, it'll be something I can make a little bit of money on until I find something that's actually worthwhile doing. And then it turned out to be like a multi-million dollar business. But basically, we started out assembling bicycles for Walmart. And then it grew and grew and grew. And then we were doing home installations for, it was all in the US. We were doing home installations for a lot of your big sporting goods chains. We were a national contractor for Sears. We were a contractor for Sports Authority, Dick's Sporting Goods, Academy Sports, Sports Chalet, Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that. So, like, for example, like Dick's Sporting Goods, if you bought a basketball goal and you wanted it installed at your house, we were the ones that came to your house to install it. Or like at Sears, if you bought a pool table, for example, we were the ones that came to your house to install it. Or Home Depot, if you bought like one of these big wooden playgrounds, like the huge ones that are like the big wooden ones, we were the ones that came to your house and installed it.
Got it. Understood. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs will resonate with your story of that first business that really did take off, where you did it because you wanted a business to generate you money, but then you
Yeah.
ended up growing to, you said, hate everything about it. And you
Yeah.
said that this bullseye effect, your business was at the core of your bullseye.
Yeah.
So what were those other rings? Like, how did that impact your family life? Did you have a family at that time? Like, how did
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
impact those other rings?
Well, sure. Like it affects everything because like I had an office, and I think at that time, like in the office, we had staff all over the country because we were doing installations in like 2/3 of the zip codes in the US. So we had a lot of staff in different parts of the country. But at our home office, we had like 30 employees at one point. So I had an office and I had to be close to the office so I could go to the office. So first of all, the first ring is it affected my day-to-day life. Like little things, where I went to lunch. It affected like my commute to work. It affected where I got to live because all my employees were there. This was in North Carolina. All my employees at this point were there. I couldn't just on a whim say, you know what? I want to move to Croatia next week. Like, or I want to move to Buenos Aires next week. I couldn't do that because I'm not going to commute from Buenos Aires to North Carolina to go to work. So it affected everything. It affected where I went on vacation because you get a 2-week vacation. Like obviously I own the company. I could set the vacation kind of however I wanted for myself. But still, in a scenario like that where you have a team and employees that come to work every day and you give them a set schedule like normal things like, hey, you come to work, you're from 8 to 5, you get 2 weeks vacation, stuff like that. If the boss is taking like a month off every week, well, it starts to look weird, right? Like he's going on vacation all the time. Your staff doesn't feel good about you. I remember one time my dad told me, he said the reason I never drive an expensive car is because if the staff see I drive a really expensive car, they think they don't get paid enough. Like I know that sounds silly, but it's kind of true. And my dad made really good money. He had a pretty large construction company when I was a kid. And the most expensive car he ever had was like a mid-grade Cadillac. So, and it just having that job or that business or that career focused in one location, it's makes you stuck. Where I went to lunch every day, it affected literally where I went to lunch every day because where my office is, there was only like a couple of places you could go to for lunch that were close enough to go for a lunch period. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it literally just affected everything. It affected where my kids went to school. It affected my hobbies, what hobbies I could have. Like for example, let's say I really wanted to get into what's it called? Kite surfing. Yeah. What if I wanted to get into kite surfing? Well, I can tell you there's no kite surfing in the middle of North Carolina. You know, you've got to go, maybe I could go live on the beach, Outer Banks, and do kite surfing, or you move to Florianopolis, Brazil, and do kite surfing, or someplace like that. So it really limited me, and then I didn't like being limited.
Did it take a toll on your relationships, like with your wife or your children?
I worked a lot in my 20s and early 30s. Yeah, I mean, I worked a ton. I had a home office too. I went to the office some. I worked from home sometimes too. Yeah, I worked a lot. I mean, it's hard to say. Like I was always kind of around for the kids, so I can't say I was like I was always all the kids' basketball games, soccer games, and stuff like that, unless I was traveling. No, that's true. It probably did affect it to some extent because I was traveling a bit. So to some extent, I suppose it did. But probably the biggest effect it had on family and kids was me because I was, probably not living the most healthy lifestyle. Like I'm much healthier now than when I was 28. Like way healthier. My lifestyle is better, my quality of life is better, my fitness is better, my diet's better, my sleep is better. Literally everything is better than when I was 28 years old, which also affects stress levels, which makes you more stressed, which means, I'm probably more, if I'm more stressed, I'm probably more angry or more quick to snap or quick to, so, maybe like I do think it affected me in that way. Sometimes, like maybe I would get mad easier and that could affect things for sure.
Would you say that being healthy, so like, getting your physical fitness eating right, having that like lower stressed lifestyle, has that impacted your new business in a positive way compared to your old business?
100%, 100%. I mean, I like my regular like routine now. I'm in the gym about on average 4 times a week. I walk on average about 6, 7 kilometers a day. So I'm like I eat pretty healthy, high protein diet. I don't do like sodas or a lot of sugar and very little bread or anything like that. So it's definitely like my health has definitely improved dramatically, but that also improves. So my sleep, I also have done a lot of things to improve my sleep, which lowers my stress, lowers cortisol levels. I feel better physically, which also gives me more energy to do well in my business, but also I'm more productive during my working hours so that I know I get more done. But I also know I'm at the point in my life now where I know, listen, maybe you don't need to work today, or maybe you need to take the afternoon off. And I have designed my life and my business is built around the idea that if I don't feel like working, sure, maybe something doesn't get done or gets postponed for a day, but nothing is an emergency. My life and my lifestyle is built around having the ability to live like that. Now, with that said, people say, oh, but you could be so much more productive if you were like hardcore focused on the business. Sure, but not everyone needs to be Elon Musk. Do you know what I mean? Like I have a lot of respect for him. Love Elon Musk, hate him, doesn't really matter, but you can't argue he's a visionary and a hardworking and a very smart guy. But I don't want to live like that. I don't want, colonizing Mars to be the focus of my life. You know what I mean? I want to provide value to my clients. I'm passionate about what I do for my clients and the results my clients get. But at the end of the day, this is my life and I get to ride this. I get to ride this roller coaster one time. I want to make it a good ride.
I love that. It's such a great story. When you pivoted and shut down the installation business and then went all in on your wealth and asset protection, but also on business anywhere, providing those tax optimization services and like setting up, US LLCs for
Yeah.
people who don't live in the US or for people who do live in the US and all those products that you have. Well, what made it successful specifically from like a marketing campaign strategy? What did you do that got it off the ground from $0 a month to wherever, whatever that first big hurdle was? What was that marketing channel? What was that thing you did that made the business grow?
Well, that was a little bit of a cheat because I already had the consulting practice for a long time before that. And we had already been registering companies for people for years. like 15 years or something like that. So all we really did at that to get started is once we rolled out Business Anywhere. So Business Anywhere is effectively like a SaaS business. I mean, it's a software company ultimately. Like, yes, there is a manual service provided on the back end, but it's an automation tools for people to register their company. So like you can go on our website, you can register your company, get registered agent service, get your EIN number, you can open your bank account, set up bookkeeping, accounting, in some cases tax filings, you can even get an ITIN number for non-US people, you can get your trademark, all these things. Like but it's all in a kind of a software platform. We automate all of your like state compliance and all this stuff. We're actually the only registered agent that fully automates your annual state compliance. So like filing your annual reports, paying your state fees, all this stuff. It's a fully automated platform. And that was my whole goal is when I had the consulting practice, we got tired of manually renewing all of our clients' companies. Like it was tedious. I mean, we were renewing companies literally every day of the year, just doing it in a manual way. So at first, I built Business Anywhere. I hired a developer to build the software to automate the renewals of like LLCs and corporations. And that's originally what it was going to be, is just renewing people, like starting and renewing people's companies. And then it just kind of grew from there. But I already had these existing clients and I just kind of rolled them over into Business Anywhere. And then, I mean, we got, a team of developers that are every day, rolling out new products and updating the system and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's essentially a software company, but the initial bump of customers came just because we already had them in the other company.
Yeah, that's such a valuable insight because so many people don't realize that if you're in a business right now, even though you might not like it, the things you do to improve that business might be that jump to the next business where it makes
Yeah,
complete sense where you built out this internal tool to make your own life easier, and then you're like, oh, this tool itself is super valuable. I should distribute this to other people. And
it
I'm going through
happens
the
a
same
lot.
process too. Yeah, it happens a lot. Slack was a very famous company, started off as an internal group at another company, and then they jumped in and were like, Slack can be its own thing. And a few other products as well that have come out of the software space were originally tools inside someone's team or a larger company that they either used or didn't use, but they're like, this could be better. And then that really
Was it
gives you that
Liquid
opportunity.
Death? You know the water, Liquid Death?
Yeah.
It started as a joke.
Yeah.
Like it literally started as a joke. There's a lot of things like that start like, hey, let's build this one thing to make our lives a little bit easier. And then that one thing, it's like, yeah, the rest of this business is terrible. Let's just do this one thing, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk about those tax strategies a
Yeah.
little bit more. So, who is like the main person, like your standard client or maybe your ideal client? Who are they and what are their needs? And then how do you help them save taxes?
So, from a tax optimization strategy, most of our clients are either location independent entrepreneurs who either live outside of their home country or they have business outside of their home country. So, we don't only work with US persons. Actually, about 40% of our client base is non US people. So, a lot of times people say, oh, yeah, but you guys are American. Actually, our team is not only American, our team is all over the world. But people say, oh, you're an American, so you can only work with Americans. Like I just got somebody funny. It was actually a podcast that had asked if I wanted to be on it. And then they said, oh, you're American. We only deal with expats from the UK. You can't deal with that. And I'm like, actually, I've got hundreds of UK expat clients. So basically, like digital nomads, expats, or like people who have business outside of their home country is kind of what we deal with. So, like a good example would be, let's say, excuse me, sorry about this cough. Let's say you're an American and you live, let's say you're kind of a nomadic style. You live part of the year in Mexico, maybe part of the year in Thailand, and part of the year in, I don't know, Argentina, let's just say, for example. And you've got a software company, like a SaaS business, and let's say that company, you have clients all over the world and you need to get paid in Stripe or PayPal or merchant processing. And let's say your development team is all in Ukraine. So that could be a very standard, typical client for me, because if you think about it, if that American person, the owner of the company, goes and explains that to his local CPA, they're going to say, we have no clue. Like in most cases, we have no clue, unless they specialize in that. Then maybe they have some idea. But typically, even if it's a CPA or accounting firm that specializes in dealing with foreign reporting, very often they don't know how to deal with the structure, the front end part of the structure. They know how to do the reporting, like which forms to file on the back end, but they don't necessarily know how to optimize the structure on the front end. So that would be like a typical client we would work with. So we may go to him and say, hey, let's figure out the company structure for you that best works for your situation so that you're not paying tax where you don't need to, and you can pay less tax in the places you do need to. We can optimize a lot of these things. And let's work on having a residency structure or a residency program for you that makes sense for your lifestyle. Like, because a lot of people say, well, in this scenario, American who lives part of the year in Mexico, part of the year in Thailand, and part of the year in Argentina, it's confusing for them. They're like, what do I do? Where do I claim as residency? How do I even do this? I live between 3 countries and I'm a citizen of another one with the business somewhere else. So what happens is very often is that person says, I'm American. I'll just register a corporation in the US because I don't know any better. And that's the only thing I know. And I'm an American. So let me talk to my CPA. And my CPA says, just register an S Corp or a C Corp or something like that. And very often that is not optimized at all. Or, another situation could be like, somebody from the UK who lives in, let's say, Serbia and has e-commerce business selling predominantly in North America. It's not really sure. Do you register the company in the UK? Do you register it in Serbia? Do you register it in the US? What about tax treaties? What do you do about cross-border transactions? All these things. So that would be a typical client of ours for tax optimization strategies.
Yeah. So what would you do with a client like that? And I'm gonna get super selfish.
You want to do a case study?
Let's do it on me. So I'm a Canadian, still a Canadian resident.
Okay.
But we don't spend like a ton of time in Canada. At least like we are a little bit now because we have 2 young boys and we're a little bit more stable. But for the most part, we spend multiple months every year traveling around, lots of time in Mexico, in the US, a little bit of time traveling around to other countries, but those are definitely our 2 main countries. And my business, my agency services, our team is global. A couple people in Canada, but mostly global. Nobody in the US. We have, I have the Auto Growth Academy, which is my school community where there's live coaching calls. Happens wherever I physically am, but I guess it technically happens like online. What would you do for someone like me? Because I've been interested in looking at setting up a US LLC because these corporations don't get taxed as much if you're owned by a foreign corporation compared to a Canadian corp. Is that
so right now? So right now you're running your business through a Canadian corp?
I am, yes.
I mean, we can dig in. Do you really want to do this? You want to do
let's do this. Yeah, let's dig in.
Like this will be like let's call it a mini consultation. So my disclaimer here is we're probably not going to, because the time, we're not going to be able to dig into every single detail because we're doing this on a podcast. So I can't give you every single detail. So bear with me on that. Typically in a situation like this, I have hundreds of Canadian clients who are in exactly your situation. I can tell you, first of all, for you, the good news is, we can get into more detail, but the good news is most likely you could easily pay 0 tax and never have to file again in Canada for the rest of your life. Well, okay, I say the rest of your life, unless you go back to Canada. You can close your Canadian corp. That would be the first thing. Or not first. We got to get your company set up somewhere else first. But once you're properly structured, you'd want to close that Canadian corp. There's some things you need to do to exit the Canadian tax system. There's a few steps you got to take. I don't want to go into all the details because that involves literally going down a checklist and running through the CRA website. But there's some checklists of things you need to do. But once you properly exit the Canadian tax system, you're out. And
just so I'm extremely clear here, I kind of view there's like 2 entities, right? There's your business, the LLC, the corporation, and there's you, the person.
Yeah.
So are you saying that your recommendation would be like for both to be out of the Canadian system?
Yes. So the most important is you. to be out of the Canadian system. However, if you keep your business in Canada, you're still going to owe Canadian corporate tax, first of all. And second of all, you're still going to owe personal tax in Canada because that's considered Canadian source income because you're taking a paycheck from a Canadian company. So in other words, if you're going to personally exit the Canadian tax system, it would actually hurt you to keep a Canadian corp because you would then need to you would basically be paying non-resident tax, which is taxed at a higher rate in Canada than if you were resident in Canada. But if you move your business out of Canada and you out of Canada and you do the proper things to exit, now you pay zero in Canada, personally and corporate, and you never have to file again.
Where would they go to? And where would you recommend they go to? Where does the business get registered? Where does the person get registered?
So here's the thing. So the most important thing here, that's not really fair to say. The first important thing here, let's put it like that, not the most, because they're all pretty critical. The first important thing is what you do as an individual. And this is something that there's a huge amount of completely wrong information out there, specifically for Canadians, is you actually don't have to be a tax resident anywhere, okay? It's not required for you as a Canadian to be a tax resident anywhere as long as you follow the proper checklist to exit the Canadian system. Now, there are some things that would maybe keep you tied to Canada that you may or may not want to get rid of. Like if you decide you want to keep your primary home in Canada, then there's some other things you got to do. You would need to get tax residence in a country that had a tax treaty with Canada. Like, I don't know, you said you spent time in Mexico, so Mexico would be a decent option for you. But if you don't own a primary residence in Canada, now I particularly am calling it a primary residence because you can own property in Canada, but if you own a home you claim as your primary residence, then that changes your primary connecting factors to residency in Canada. But you can own a secondary home. The big difference there is, let's say you own a home now. Do you own a home now?
I do.
So if you want to keep it, then what you do is, if you want to keep it, then it would no longer be considered your primary home. It would be considered like a vacation property or an investment property or whatever, something like that. And the moment it's no longer classified as your primary residence, you're going to lose your capital gains tax treatment on selling a primary residence. So if you exited today, then you'd probably want to go get an appraisal of your house so that you had today's cost basis for the day you exit Canada. So let's just, for math's sake, let's say you bought that house for $100,000. Today it's worth $500,000. And let's say 5 years later, you decide to sell it and it sells for, let's say, $1 million. You don't want to pay capital gains between $1 million and $100. If you get the appraisal done today, the day you exit, then you'd only pay capital gains between the appraised value today when you exited and the day you sell it. So $500K. So you would still owe tax on the sale of that house because it can't be deemed your primary residence in that case. Okay. So there's a lot of nuances to this. The easiest thing, obviously, is to sell your house. The second easiest thing to do is to get the appraisal and claim it as a secondary residence, vacation house, or something like that. That's what a lot of my clients do. As long as you do the right things, though, you don't have to have tax residency anywhere. And that's a huge confusion. I've seen countless YouTube videos that give completely wrong information. If we were on a proper consultation, I would open up the CRA website and show you literally line by line where you do not have to do that. But people get it wrong all the time. CPA accountants, or CAs in Canada, get it wrong all the time. That if you go to your local accountant and tell them you want to exit, they're going to tell you have to have tax residency somewhere else. 100% false.
That's insane. Like that, most people don't realize that. And myself included, actually, until this conversation. And I think I know the YouTube channel you're talking about, but there are some very prominent YouTube influencers that say, don't live here, go move yourself to over here to pay less taxes. But you're saying just don't pay tax, like essentially become a non-resident. Yeah, don't do it at all. Don't go anywhere else.
Or
mind-blowing.
Or become resident somewhere else that has a territorial tax system.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, if you really like Costa Rica, for example, Costa Rica has a territorial tax system. If your business is properly structured, you don't pay tax in Costa Rica on income you earn from a company outside of Costa Rica. So let's say you just want to be an expat and you want to go live on the beach in Costa Rica and go surf every day and run your company from your living room or whatever. Register your company somewhere outside of Costa Rica, obviously, get residency, even tax residency in Costa Rica is fine because even if you're a tax resident, you're not going to have a tax obligation because you don't have taxable income under their own tax rules.
Right. So the
So
person either becomes a non-resident or finds that lower taxed residency area. Where does the corporation go usually?
So let me clarify that point. You can go to a lower tax jurisdiction as well. Like Canada's insanely high, right? Like
Yeah.
crazy, crazy high. You can go to a lower tax jurisdiction. My recommendation is to go to, if you're going to go plant roots somewhere, go to a country like Costa Rica, where, and I'm not promoting Costa Rica, it's just an easy example. But go to a place like Costa Rica where it's a territorial tax system and use that to claim your tax residency status. And let me make another point here. There's a difference between physical residency and tax residency. They're not the same thing. So if you go to Mexico and become a physical resident, meaning you go through the process to like temporary or even permanent residency in Mexico, you meet a certain checklist of requirements to become a resident, which gives you the rights to reside in Mexico. But that doesn't make you a tax resident. There's a whole different set of rules from a completely different government agency that makes you a tax resident. And in Mexico, it would be very difficult for you as a Canadian to actually become a tax resident in Mexico. So unless you had a job in Mexico or a business in Mexico, or I don't know, you're investing in real estate in Mexico or something like that, it would be really difficult for you to actually become a tax resident. So you could actually move from Canada to Mexico, become a resident, but you wouldn't fulfill the requirements to be a tax resident there. So in essence, you would have physical residency, but no tax residency.
Got
That
it.
makes sense?
Understood. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then the
And
other
so,
option is, and this is a lifestyle choice, of course. The other option is to have a lifestyle like you, where you remain nomadic, and you maybe spend a couple of months in Canada in the summertime, and maybe you visit friends in the U.S. for a couple of months, and you spend 3 or 4 months in Mexico, and then maybe you go spend a couple of months in Italy eating pizza and pasta on the Adriatic coast or something like that. And you kind of live like that. And then in that scenario, you wouldn't ever become a tax resident anywhere because you just kind of remain nomadic and you've properly exited your home tax system. And then I
got it.
think your question was
Understood.
business. Where would you register the
Yeah.
business, right? So if we're back to you as our case study, the front end of the business definitely should be a US LLC, okay? Which is ultimately, because to rewind with my consulting practice, very often for non-US people and US people, a US LLC makes the most sense for running your business. Now, there could be a hybrid model where you have a holding company or something like that, and I can get into that in a second for you. But that's the whole reason we started Business Anywhere, because our clients were these location independent people. And in probably 90% of the situations, a US LLC is the thing that made the most sense anyway. So, like, you see a lot about people talking about registering a company in Dubai or a company in Hong Kong or Estonian e-residency and registering an Estonian company, stuff like that. You see a lot of people talking about those types of options. The reality is they're viable. They're viable in certain circumstances, but they don't work for the majority of people. And even if they do work for you, a US LLC is probably a better option for you anyway, because it's easier and it's simpler, it's cheaper, it's easier to maintain. Compliance costs is super simple. So going back to you as our case study, I would probably register an LLC in Wyoming. The reason you'd want to do it, let me just for people who don't understand the US system, there's no, like in Canada, you can, well, that's not true. In Europe, let's say, if you register a company in Germany, it's a German company. It's not like a company in this territory of Germany. In the US, every LLC or every corporation is registered in the state. There's no such thing as a US LLC. There's a Florida LLC or a California corporation or a Wyoming LLC or, a South Carolina corporation. Wyoming is, for most people living abroad, is our first choice because it's low cost. We can register it completely privately where your name is nowhere listed in public record if it's done correctly. We specifically, we register privacy by default, which means if it's not legally required with the Secretary of State, we do not include any personal information about you in the filing. That way, none of your information appears in public record. And I say where it's legally possible, because some states it's not legally possible. Like California, for example, we have to at least include your name as the manager of the company. But in Wyoming, we don't have to include anything, nothing about you. So the benefits of a U.S. LLC, whether it's Wyoming or any other state from a tax perspective, is an LLC in the U.S. by default is a pass-through entity, or what we call a disregarded entity for tax purposes. So that means all the profit flows through to Mark. So Mark LLC makes, let's say, $100,000. Well, Mark LLC is not a taxable entity. It flows through to Mark the human, and Mark has personal income of $100,000. Now, Mark may or may not have a tax obligation based on the nature of that income and the connection to the U.S. and stuff like that. But in your scenario, what you're doing, unless you decide to go open a physical office or open or hire employees that you like where you actually withhold payroll tax on them, you're not going to have what's called ECI, or effectively connected income to a U.S. trade or business in the U.S. So as a non-U.S. person, if you do not have that effectively connected income to a U.S. trade or business, you can run your business through a U.S. LLC, and it flows through to you as the human, and you have no tax obligation whatsoever. Now, you do have a filing obligation. There's technically two forms you got to file as a non-U.S. person. There's a form called a IRS Form 5472 that you have to file by April 15th every year, and you file that with an 1120. And all that does is tells the IRS that that entity is more than 25% owned by a non-U.S. person, so they know where the income flowed to. But if you're a non-U.S. person and you don't have ECI, then you don't have to file or pay tax. So that's what I mean. Like, comparatively, people say, like, why don't I do an Estonian, OU, like get e-residency and do an Estonian OU? Well, first of all, Estonia, even if you owe nothing, you have a monthly income tax and a monthly VAT tax filing. And if you're 1 day late, it racks up as 100 euros a day late fees. And now they're cracking down because there's no corporate tax on Estonian companies, but there is a 20%, or depending on some factors, but around a 20% profit distribution tax. But now Estonia is cracking down on that if you don't have tax residency anywhere, they can just withhold it from your bank account at the Estonian rate. Whereas in the US, it's not going to be withheld. Like, it just flows through to you unless you have that ECI, unless you have that. So for the vast majority of people, like in your situation, I mean, a US LLC makes you can, like, even on our website, we don't even charge to register the company. We even give you registered agent service for free in the first year. The only thing you pay for is any of the like add-on things. If we create documents for you, or we file for some things for you, like your tax number and stuff like that. You only pay for us when you renew it in the second year. You have to pay the registered agent fee when you renew it in the second year. So like, it doesn't even, it's so insanely cheap to register a U.S. company and do all this through the U.S. And then you have to do your annual once a year tax report you've got to do, and that's it. Whereas if you're doing this through an Estonian company, you're paying a couple $100 a month for an accountant every single month to do those filings for you. And then you might end up with a tax obligation anyway.
Yeah. So if I'm listening to this podcast right now, and I have a business similar to myself where you're paying a ton of tax. For people who don't know, like, taxes from my Canadian corporation were the single highest expense that we had outside of employees.
Yeah,
and then as we go,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. And well, that's why I've been looking into it so heavily. And if someone's doing that and they're like, you know what, I don't know about, I want to still live in my country, wherever that country is.
Yeah.
But that idea of a US LLC sounds pretty appealing. And you said it's dirt cheap. How cheap are we talking about?
I mean, well, like I said, we don't even charge you to register the company for you. Like, it's free. You do pay the state fee. So that varies by state. It can be anywhere from, like, on the low end, like $50 up to California is the upper end, where it's like $800 some dollars. But like Wyoming, where we do most of them for non-US people anyway, I believe it's $108 or $105 or something like that is the state fee. And then if you did everything else with us, like if we did your tax ID number filing for you, we draft your company documents like your operating agreement, and you wanted the virtual mailbox, which is, an upsell from us. If you wanted the virtual mailbox, I mean, it'd still be less than $1,000. I mean, it'd be, I think if you went all in on basically everything, it's like less than $800 actually, like 700 something bucks to do
Wow.
everything.
And is there anything missing from that? Is there any, like, do I need to go
Well,
get
your
a
annual
that
tax
or what
filing,
else?
your
Annual
annual
tax filing.
your annual tax report, you got to file that 5472 and the 1120, and then you'll pay a few $100 for an accountant to file that for you.
Got it. Which means
That
you
that
probably
would
need
be
some bookkeeping somewhere too.
Yeah. I mean, we actually do that too. We do the annual tax filing for non-U.S. people in the U.S. I think we charge $700 to do that annual tax report. So it's
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, if you wanted us to do it, I mean, you're a little over $1,000 to register it, and then ongoing $1,000-ish, $1,200, including the tax filing.
To put this into perspective for people listening to this, I have a payment going out tomorrow to the Canadian government, the Canadian Revenue Agency for taxes, and it's over $6,000. And that's just for 1 month. And that's just for one type of tax. So this is why I've been looking into this like so heavily. And I've gone through an experience like you mentioned where, hey, you go to talk to your local CPA or your accountant and you say, hey, how can you help me optimize my taxes and like pay less? And for the most part, none of them will tell you these solutions that Bobby's talking about. And from my own personal experience, I think the reason why is because when you become that CPA, you are trained in, accounting and taxes for the US or sometimes even for just state specific or for Canada. So
Yeah,
they have
exactly.
no idea. They have no idea you could even do these things. They don't even know it's a possibility, which is why as an entrepreneur, I found I had to go out and do this research myself. I talked to my accountants a little bit about it, but like at the end of the day, I've came to realize that it's talking with really tax optimization specialists like yourself that know the most, all the ins and outs of these different countries and have those relationships with the accountants and the CPAs in the right jurisdictions to keep you compliant everywhere. So
Let
if
me,
someone's listening, yeah.
I just want to make it real clear. I'm not an expert in tax optimization in Canada. I'm an expert helping people who are exiting Canada. So if you are in Canada and you're like, I want to live in Canada, be in Canada, run my business in Canada, live in the suburbs with the white picket fence, all that stuff, I'm not your guy. I'm the guy if you want to go live in Costa Rica and you want to, but your Canadian accountant has no idea to help you do that, if that makes sense.
That makes
It's a niche. It's a niche. It's a niche. And to your point, like most accountants, they never train in that. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. So first of all, accounting just as a trade, as a educational path, and then as a trade is an extremely conservative like process. They teach you to be like extremely excuse me. They teach you to be extremely conservative in your approach because you have the license to do this work by the government. So you've got to stay kind of really, really within the boundaries of the law. Not that this is outside of the boundaries of the law, but they have the mindset that I don't even want to do anything that looks like it might be on the edges. So they don't like, I know this is a visual representation, but these are the edges of the law. They don't even come close to that. They keep you like really straight line down the center because their mindset is if they sign off on your tax return and something looks a little questionable and you get audited, they signed off on it. So they have liability associated with your tax filing if something is fishy. So they don't even go anywhere near the edges in most cases. And then also the other thing is if you got an accountant who, let's say he's in Toronto and 99 out of 100 of his clients live in Toronto with a business or a job in Toronto. They live there, their house there, their investments there, everything. And then you got the 1 out of 100 are like you, Mark, who come in and say, hey, I live 9 months out of the year outside of Canada. What do I do? Why would he learn all these more complex niche things when you're literally 1 out of 100 or probably more likely 1 out of 1,000 of those clients? So what I do is very, very niche. But to rewind back to the lifestyle thing, the reason I chose this niche is I like people who do this lifestyle. I enjoy actually talking to people like you, Mark, to solve the problem, who live cool, unique lives, who don't, have the white picket fence lifestyle. I do it completely selfishly because I like talking to people like you. I don't like talking to, normies, so to speak. So like it's a completely selfish thing from my perspective, but it's how I chose the business that I wanted to be in because it's what the type of people I like dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic to hear that. And I think a lot of people who are listening are definitely interested in your services, cuz at least for me, I got like kind of sent into this like professional loop, death spiral is what I called it. Cuz I talked to my accountant, they said, "Oh, go talk to a lawyer." My wife's a lawyer. Talked to my wife and she said, "I don't know, maybe a tax lawyer." Talked to a tax lawyer, they said, "Go talk to an accountant." And I came back and I'm like, "They said talk to you." And they were like, "Maybe go talk to the CRA." And I talked to them. They're like, "Talk to a lawyer." And then I'm like, here goes this. And like, you just can't get out of it. So
Yeah,
for
you're
people who
stuck.
are in that spiral, or who are like me and like, want to go deeper with their own situations, where can they go to start learning more and working with you guys and your expertise?
I'll answer this 2 seconds because the last thing I wanted to wrap up with Mark's case study is the company structure. Typically, the front end, you want it to be the Wyoming LLC or New Mexico or Delaware or whatever. So some good state like that. South Dakota is fine too. The reason you want it like that is number one, banking is easy, payment processing, like all of your tech stack for everything you're going to do in an online business is all based in the US. Okay. I don't care who you are, what you say, the tech stack to build an online business is all based around US products and services. I mean, sure, there are fintechs from the UK, there are fintechs in Lithuania and Estonia, but you know what they do? They register companies in the US as their US arm to deal with US business. Okay. Because it's easier. I got a funny anecdotal story I can tell you in a second, but about this whole thing. So it makes your life easier just to have a US based business because it's just simple. The one thing, so going back to you as Mark the human and not Mark LLC, the other thing you do need to consider is where you physically spend your time, and if you could potentially be a tax resident in that particular country. And in some cases, we might want to register a holding company in a zero tax offshore jurisdiction. On occasion, we do that because, like, Mexico is a good example of this. If you did go get residency in Mexico and physical residence, you had physical residence in Mexico, and let's say you were spending most of your time there, but you were working on your business through a Wyoming LLC, that profit's going to flow through to you as a natural person. And according to Mexican tax regulations, that's considered personal income, which would in fact make you a tax resident in Mexico because more than half of your income is coming at this point from Mexican sources. But if we register an offshore holding company in a zero tax jurisdiction, and then you pay yourself a dividend from that company, then it's treated as foreign source income, and then you don't have the tax obligation. So depending on where you spend your time, it's possible we might want to put a holding company in place there. If you remain fully nomadic, then the holding company is usually not necessary, but just to keep you potentially out of a tax trap somewhere else, a holding company does make a lot of sense. Okay, so that's my quick Mark, case study there.
That's amazing. Thank you so
And
much for treating me as a case study, because I know there's a lot of people in that similar situation. It might not be a Canada, it might be a UK and England, or a Spain and Germany. So lots
we
of
got
different people in those situations.
I think at this point we have clients from over 100 countries. So I think maybe not all the Caribbean countries and a couple of the Central American countries, but all your big North American countries, we have clients. Most of your South American countries. I think at this point we have clients from every country in Europe, most of Asia at this point. So yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, but I'm German, you can't really work with me. Well, I couldn't work with you if you're German living in Germany, but if you're trying to, or if you had a business outside of Germany, but otherwise, yeah. The only thing that's really going to make you mad, Mark, is to know that you could have been doing this for years.
I won't be able to do the math. It'll make me cry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I suggest, like, I just had a consulting client call with a guy last week who we're in the process of fixing everything, restructuring everything. Also a Canadian, and he's a pretty high earner. And he's been living abroad since like 2019, but he just kept his company in Canada and kept paying tax in Canada. And I told him, I said, look, I highly encourage you to not go back and do the math because it's just going to really piss you off. Don't do it. You're not going to be happy when you look at those numbers because Canada doesn't want to give you the money back.
No, they will not.
They don't want to give it back. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Bobby, for coming on and doing this interview. It was fantastic. I love being able to extract your business story and your expertise. Super, super valuable. Where can people go if they want to get started with you, have some consult calls, and really, work with you?
The easiest way to reach us is just businessanywhere.io. That's the easy button.
Awesome. And I will link that and all of Bobby's socials in the show notes. Bobby, once again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Mark.
And I will see everybody in the next episode.